Today, I'll try to recreate a 3,000-year-old Assyrian cake with the help of a scholar, a food scientist, and a baker. If you're new to the channel, my name is Arim, and for the last 5 years, I've been working on Table of Gods, a cookbook inspired by the world's oldest recipes written on clay tablets 4,000 years ago. If that sounds like a book you'd be interested in, visit tableofgods.com/YT to join the waitlist and get 3 of the recipes from the book. The Sumerians were the first people in history to mention their consumption of cakes, which makes sense. They invented humanity's first writing system, cuneiform, in 3200 BC to keep records of things such as rations, contracts, and sheep. In the centuries that followed, the cuneiform system evolved from a pictographic script to a complex writing system capable of expressing more abstract ideas, such as cakes. And from this Sumerian proverb, we learn their place in society. Cakes are a luxury to be foregone by a frugal man. There are several reasons why most Sumerians never got to taste cake. To start with, the ingredients were expensive. The Sumerian city-states were located in what's today southern Iraq. That's an arid place with little rainfall. The reason the Sumerians managed to build the first cities in that area was because they learned to dig canals to artificially irrigate fields, which together with the invention of the plow resulted in an agricultural productivity 10 times higher than in other places in the world. That's why the first city in the world, Uruk, reached up to 140,000 inhabitants by 2900 BC. For perspective, Stockholm, where I live, reached 140,000 inhabitants about 150 years ago. But for cakes, irrigation was a bad idea. It increased the soil salinity, which made wheat cultivation difficult. That's why barley accounted for over 90% of the crops in southern Mesopotamia. Barley was more tolerant to saline soils than wheat, but also lower in gluten, and it's the gluten that allows a dough to stretch, and with the addition of yeast, to rise. But if you were a Sumerian merchant connected to northern Mesopotamia, where wheat was plentiful, you could likely trade dates for wheat flour, assuming you had date palms. But you'd still struggle with how to bake the cake. Most Sumerians owned cylindrical clay ovens known as tinuru, which by the way influenced the Indian word tandoor, which are still used all over the Middle East. But while you can make ridiculously good flatbread on the inner walls of these ovens, they aren't suited for baking cakes. For that, you would need a dome oven whose evenly distributed heat works similar to our modern ovens. In Mesopotamia, such ovens were often found in palaces or temple kitchens. But let's assume you were of royal descent, the son or daughter of King Ur-Nammu, the founder of the Sumerian Renaissance and the builder of the great Ziggurat in Ur. Then you'd have your cakes. And one clay tablet dated to the reign of King Ur-Nammu actually reveals that cakes have gone to the palace, and continues with the ingredients. 1 sila of butter, a 1/3 sila of white cheese, 3 sila of first quality dates, a 1/3 sila of Smyrna raisins. This ingredient list, however, is not complete since the tablet is broken, but it still confirms that cakes were baked. And a cake sent to the palace during the Sumerian Renaissance wasn't just any cake. Unfortunately, this is the closest we get to a Sumerian cake recipe. In 2004 BC, Ur-Nammu's dynasty fell, and so did the Sumerian era that gave humanity writing, cities, laws, and much more. But luckily for us, the tradition of cakes continued. Around 1770 BC, in the city of Mari, King Zimrilim established a team of bakers in his palace. 8 of them were titled Shah Mersin, meaning Mersu specialists. One clay tablet reveals that the Mersu specialists received an order of 110 liters of dates and 10 liters of pistachios to make Mersu. We know that butter or ghee, wheat flour, cumin, and sometimes onions were used in this dessert, which could have taken many forms. But since archaeologists found dozens of baking molds in Mari, I think it may have been more of a cookie. This Mersu recreation is one of 3 recipes you get when you join the waitlist for my upcoming cookbook at tableofgods.com/YT. 500 years after Zimrilim's death in the Assyrian city of Ashur, we have the most solid evidence of a cake from ancient Mesopotamia. A cake inspired by the Mesopotamian temple towers, ziggurats. The Assyrians had an affection for innovation. Hanging gardens, enormous palaces, and human-headed bulls are just a few examples. But their innovation extended to the culinary arts too. Assyrian kings and queens threw enormous banquets to showcase their power. In the queen's house in Nineveh alone, 1,300 kitchen workers were employed. And that number should be multiplied when King Ashurnasirpal II threw the largest party in history, where 69,574 people, or 0.14% of the world's population, celebrated the new Assyrian capital Kalhu for 10 days straight. With today's population of about 8 billion, that same party would have 11.2 million guests. Ashurnasirpal's menu included 1,200 oxen, 15,000 sheep, 20,000 pigeons, 10,000 eggs, 200,000 liters of alcohol, but the list is so long I'll stop here. But not all guests at Ashurnasirpal's Kalhu party would eat the best meat and drink the most expensive beer, and even fewer would get to taste the Ziggurat cake. In fact, Ziggurat cakes weren't even mentioned on Ashurnasirpal's party menu, perhaps because they were reserved for the king and the royal family. But what was the Ziggurat cake anyway? In 1853, archaeologist Hormuz Rassam was excavating in Mosul when he found a tall stone, later named the White Obelisk. On it were depictions of a cake with 4 tiers. The cake was called Ziggurattu and was invented by people titled Shah Siggurateshu, meaning Ziggurat specialists, a position held in Assyrian palaces for half a thousand years. The Ziggurat specialists baked this cake to satisfy the Assyrian gods and indirectly the royal family who got to eat the gods' leftovers. As you can imagine, the Ziggurat specialists had no reason to reveal their recipe. Their jobs depended on them being the only ones knowing the secret. But that didn't stop me from investigating if I could find traces to recreate it. I started by consulting with Dr. Salvatore Gaspa, who holds a PhD degree in ancient Near Eastern studies. Dr. Gaspa is an expert on ancient Assyrian food and has written several papers on the subject. In his paper titled Bread for Gods and Kings, he wrote about the Ziggurat cake. The ingredients in the Ziggurat cake included, but were not limited to, grapes, pomegranates, pistachios, sesame oil, and even chickpeas. But the most valuable element of the Ziggurat cake is something called mutaku. Mutaku was a bread with dates that formed the base layers of the Ziggurat cake, and was also used to bake the Assyrian bread huhurtu. So with the cake base defined and some other ingredients to guide us, I recruited my sister as the Shah Siggurateshu. She started the process by drawing, calculating, and ordering special pans. What we know for certain is that the Ziggurat cake was enormous. That's obvious from its depictions, but also from a source mentioning that 12.5 liters of sesame oil were used to bake one Ziggurat cake. But when my sister, who is a seasoned baker, test-baked the Ziggurat cake, she failed miserably. Baking a cake without refined sugar or baking powder, which the ancient Assyrians didn't have access to, turned out to be much more complicated than we initially thought. The cake became too dense, or just didn't hold together. But even worse, it tasted bad and certainly didn't meet my expectations of what a cake offered to the Assyrian gods should taste like. So I consulted with a food scientist, and after a lesson in science, we realized the Ziggurat cake wouldn't have the same texture as a modern cake. Mainly because we replaced baking powder with yeast and sugar with honey to make the cake authentic to the time period. But could we still make it taste great for modern people? Standing 13 inches or 33 centimeters tall, weighing in at 15 pounds or 6.8 kilos and reaching a staggering 26,743 calories, this beauty or beast, depending on how you look at her, serves 70 people. And I think King Ashurnasirpal would react in one of two ways if I gave it to him. One, he would offer a huge smile and devour the cake. Two, he would chop off my head and devour the cake. The recipe for the Ziggurat cake is currently in the hands of my recipe editor, who has encouraged me to scale down the recipe, something I obviously won't do in fear of the Assyrian gods. But if you don't want to wait until my book is out to get the taste of ancient Mesopotamia, go to tableofgods.com/YT to get 3 recipes from the book.